I don't know whether you're aware of it, but back home in Canada this weekend, today especially, we're celebrating Thanksgiving. And in other words, I'm working on my holiday, but I don't mind. I brought my wife with me, and I don't think she's interested in what I have to say. She's most likely out shopping, spending my money in some of your fair stores here at Huron. But I am pleased to be here. And when you think of Thanksgiving, there are a few things back up in Saskatchewan that we give thanks for at this particular time. We give thanks for the good crops that we've had. For the most part, they've been harvested in reasonably good weather. We give thanks that you people here in the States have seen fit so far only to have exported to us Cargills, and you're still keeping Bungie and a few more down here all to yourselves, which we give thanks for. There's a few other things that we give thanks for in Saskatchewan. One, we already have a land bank program in place, so we give thanks for that too. The heading of my address this morning, I call it the Saskatchewan Land Bank, a good idea that's working. This is the catchphrase that we use in our press releases and this type of thing. The first question to be explored in it is why a land bank in Saskatchewan? Saskatchewan is basically an agricultural province. Thus, the Depression of the 30s was more dramatic than in any other part of Canada. It was just before and during this period that the majority of farmers recognized that, as individuals, they did not have any economic punch. And I think that's why what you people have found out, or you wouldn't be here today as a group called the Farmers Union. There were certain things that the people of Saskatchewan decided they could do on their own behalf, such as forming the Saskatchewan Wheat Pool in order to do joint battle with the private grain trade that was slowly bleeding the lifeblood away from the farmers. The Wheat Pool is today the largest farmer-owned grain handling organization in the world. The prairie pools have continually fought to get a good square deal for the farmers. The farmers recognized that there was a need for an organization of farmers which was not tied to a commercial organization. From this was developed what is known as our National Farmers Union up in Canada. They decided they could control their own destinies to some extent by organizing co-ops and their own wholesale organization known as federated cooperatives. And as I drive through the States, you decided you could do the same things for yourselves and have done it. They decided that if the money market was going to give a fair shake to the average man on the street, they would need to get together there as well. They started what is now a very large credit union system in Saskatchewan. Each year it has a bigger and bigger financial impact on you and I, the average citizen of our provinces and our states. These same co-ops and credit unions got together and formed their own trust company, for which I worked for some 13 years. Saskatchewan people can now get trust and estate services at cost. They also organize their own co-op insurance, which you people have done here as well, to provide life, fire, casualty insurance to themselves at cost. There were, however, things that they could not do themselves, but had to go the government route. Most of the programs that developed through the government received strong and bitter opposition from its critics, not unlike the opposition that the people, when they set up those programs that I've just mentioned, received strong opposition to before they got it working. Some of these government programs were the taking over of the telephone and power system, which permitted the farm people of Saskatchewan to have these amenities for the first time, and amenities they would never have had if it had not have been for the government doing it for them. Saskatchewan has a power and telephone grid unsurpassed anywhere in the world, and we got it at a realistic cost. Medicare was another program that they brought in, first in Saskatchewan. People say that castor oil is the best medicine before a cough, because once taken, one doesn't dare cough. Well, before Medicare, many people in Saskatchewan didn't dare get sick because the cost would have bankrupted them for life. Thus, the people of Saskatchewan are used to both self-help programs and programs by government that fill a need which is not possible for the individual to go it alone. The same government that introduced these programs also introduced the Land Bank program in July 1972. The government recognized that it was necessary to do several things. One, maintain rural Saskatchewan and its small urban centers. Two, to permit the transfer of land from generation to generation in order that the young farmer could start farming and the old farmer could retire in dignity. Three, they decided it was necessary to establish a maximum number of viable farm units in Saskatchewan. They agreed that it was necessary to supplement the land base by increasing livestock production in Saskatchewan. The method of land transfer in effect at that time did not permit these objectives to be met. Land values were such that the beginning farmer could not raise enough capital. The small uneconomic farmer could not get further capital to expand. Thus, if there was not a large farmer or corporation ready to buy, there was just no market. The younger generation was being forced into the cities, causing depopulation of rural Saskatchewan. The government recognized that land is a limited resource, that it is not a commodity that should be on the stock exchange. The more that it is treated as a commodity, the more you and I will pay for the food that we eat, and the easy possibility that we will force our cost of production to the point where we price ourselves out of the world market for the products we produce. Land bank opposition comes not from the rural areas in Saskatchewan, for the most part, but from city people and chambers of commerce. Surely we can educate them to see that land bank can strike at the roots of the spiraling costs of food, that land bank can keep more young people on the farm, which in turn means more customers for them as merchants and tradesmen, that as more farmers are established on economic land base, they pay more income tax and therefore relieve the rest of society from carrying the whole load. Let us now move into the land bank and as to how it works and what we've been able to do with it since we started it in the fall of 1972. Land bank does not take away any of the former methods of land transfer, but it does offer an alternative that is completely voluntary. Owners of land voluntarily offer it to sale to the Commission. Those who wish to lease it do so of their own free will, as a means of becoming established in farming without huge capital investment. Once an offer to sell is received, our appraisers place an average market value upon it. They do this by using comparable sales of land of similar quality in the same location or same area. In 1972, when land values were flat up in Saskatchewan, 65% of the offers that we made were accepted. In 1973, in a rising land market, 45% of our offers were accepted. In 74, 55% were accepted. I would suggest that an average acceptance of just over 50% over that 3-year period would indicate that our method of appraisal is fair and realistic. Fathers can offer their land to us, and if the son qualifies as a lessee and the father accepts our offer price, then the son takes over the lease without outside competition. Nobody can get this land but the son or the son-in-law. Incidentally, it's Women's Year in Saskatchewan, so don't get me wrong if I use the masculine gender. We also make leases to daughters. Land that is sold to us without a direct line descendant, which is father, son, grandson, son-in-law, and this type of thing, being designated, that land is then advertised for lease competition. We have anywhere from 1 to 40 people applying for some of the land that we have for lease, with an average of 5 for every parcel that we put up for competition. It follows then that we must have a method of determining who shall lease the land. There are basic requirements for any lessee. 1, he must be a Canadian citizen or a landed immigrant. He must reside in Saskatchewan for the duration of the lease. He must maintain he must be mainly occupied in farming. His net worth must be $60,000 or less. His average net income over the last 3 years cannot be over $10,000. So you can see right now we're shooting at a fairly marginal type of young fellow that haven't got a chance to get going any other way. Once a person meets these requirements, his application is placed into the competition for the land. We use a point system to determine who comes up with the highest score. The point system recognizes such things as his income potential if he had the lease, the utilization of the resources. In other words, is he going to use all of the resources on the land that we have to lease to him? What is his age? Is he the vendor's preference as to the lessee? Was he a previous renter? And of course we must watch that very carefully, because if he couldn't win a competition yet he had been leasing that land or renting it from the previous owner, and we took it away from him because he couldn't win a competition, we could bankrupt him. So we have to watch that aspect. We have to look at his experience, and we measure it. We measure his education. We're making an addition to the land that he wants to lease from us to the parcels that he already owns. We have to determine how far he is away from the land that we have. The top scoring 3 or 4 applicants are then interviewed by our councillors. The councillors then make their recommendation to the commission, and the commission makes the allocation. Anyone not satisfied with the commission that the commission has made the right decision may appeal that decision to an independent appeal board. The board privately interview those who appeal, along with the applicant who won the competition. The appeal board then makes an allocation. The appeal board's decision is final, except on points of law, in which case the matter could go to district court. Following allocation, a lease is issued to the lessee's age 65. Thus, if the lessee is 25 when he enters into a lease with us, he would get a 40-year lease. The lease is transferable to a direct descendant at any time during the lease, but must be assigned or given up at his age 65. We have a 5-year option clause in all our leases, which say that after 5 years of successful leasing, if he's still a qualified farmer and applicant, he may opt to buy that land back from us. A lot of people then think that we have a 5-year lease program, but that's not so. The 5 years refers to our option to buy only. Rents are presently set at a percentage of land value, with the lessee entering into an agreement for sale for the improvements that are on it. Under this agreement, they insure the buildings and maintain them. The Commission guarantees these lessees that if they gave up the lease, any equity they have got by the end of the lease in the improvements, we will buy it back. The land bank lessee, because of the limits on age, on the limits on net worth and his previous income, they are beginning or else they're marginal farmers, both from the standpoint of management or money sources. Knowing that the expected qualifications of these future lessees, it was determined that the success of the young farmers would be in direct relation to the amount of counseling that could be given to them. The Commission presently has 13 counselors spread out across the province of Saskatchewan to do this counseling to our lessees. An interesting development that was the purchase by Land Bank of what we call Matador Co-op Farm in west central Saskatchewan. This farm is made up of 8,000 prime agricultural acres. Following the Second World War, a group of 14 veterans were established on this same land as a cooperative under the veterans leasing program that they had at that time. They had a 10-year option to buy. During the 10 years of leasing, they had no problems. A veteran could leave and take out his equity in grain, livestock, and machinery, but however, because they did receive after 10 years a very attractive purchase option, they bought the land. The trouble started at this point. They could never agree on the value of the land when someone wanted out and a new member was brought in. They were continually in arbitration or in court. 2 years ago, they approached the Land Bank to see if we could help. All the old members agreed to step out if their sons and daughters could lease from the Commission. There was no way that these young people could raise the capital on a straight purchase program. Thus it was Land Bank to the rescue or sell to the highest bidder. To make a long story short, Land Bank did purchase and lease to the 10 young families. They set up their own housing in co-op within the co-op itself, so that the retired members could live there if they wished. At last count, there were 45 people living on the Matador Co-op farm. Compare this with a similar-sized co-op 25 miles away, just 25 miles to the east, set up on exactly the same conditions by veterans following the war. They didn't wait for Land Bank. They sold to 3 investors, none of whom are farmers, and have hired a manager and his wife, who have 1 small child, to run it for them. As a result, only 3 people support that town and community. I ask you, which is the best deal for the people of Saskatchewan? A number of our lessees, while holding separate leases, have joined together in machinery co-ops. This has cut their overhead and operating costs dramatically. The question comes up, how is the program funded? The government agreed to pay the administration costs of the program, and this comes out of the general revenue or the tax dollar. However, the government set up a land bank fund to purchase the land. The government borrows the money and turns it over to the commission, and we use it to buy land. We pay interest on it according to what they paid. Any deficit between rent received and the cost of money is paid by the government. This difference between the cost of money and what we get for rent will diminish as the program continues. There are many ways that such a program could be funded. While I was with Co-op Trust, we administered a provincial farm mortgage program. The government told us that for every dollar we found, they would match it. We decided that if the vendor left half of his money in bonds and took the other half out in cash, the government would then match the half left in bonds. In this way, we did not need to look elsewhere for money. This method of raising money under that program worked well. What have we accomplished? We've purchased from over 1,300 vendors. We've purchased some 3,500 quarters of land at a value of land and improvements of some $40 million. The land has been leased to some 1,400 lessees. 256 of those lessees are direct descendants of the vendor. 95 are leasebacks. In other words, this man sold us because he was going bankrupt. The mortgage companies were going to push him out of business, so they came to us, sold to us, and we leased him back, and he has a new lease on life, and he's still farming in Saskatchewan. 95 of those people have taken advantage of our program. The number of acres purchased is less than 1% of the farming area of Saskatchewan, yet our assistance has been made available with that land to over 2% of the actual farmers in Saskatchewan. So it's not a one-on-one situation. We can do better than that in our help side of the program. I am convinced that the land bank plan or a modified land bank plan can work anywhere. The basic design is proven in Saskatchewan. Before legislation can be expected to be successful, however, the plan has to be sold to the people. I do not know a better group to sell such a program than the Farmers Union. It won't be easy. It's a new concept. People shy away from government ownership. But you must ask yourselves, is it better government ownership of farmland or corporate ownership and corporate lessees? The land does not need to remain under government control. But I do not know of another way under present conditions to distribute the land to those people who want to farm it. Keep in mind that landowners under our program voluntarily sell it to us. The lessees voluntarily apply to lease it, and it will be their free choice whether they continue to lease or take their option to buy after a minimum of 5 years. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd be only too happy to answer any questions you have about the program. Thank you very much.
I would ask the pages now, please, to pick up the cards with your questions. If you don't have any questions written down yet, keep your cards for another.
Of a commissioner or a board, this would indicate that I go to work once a month and handle the gavel during commission meetings. Well, I do that, but once our commission meetings which define policy is done, I also am manager of the program, so I'm a double-barreled thing. The full-time commissioners, of which there are 3 of us, also manage the program as well as responsible for the decisions and policies of the program as defined by, well, as the government let us move policy and regulations along. So we are a little bit different. So we not only have experience in policy, we also manage the program.
Would you bring me up a few of those questions, please? Maybe some of these questions that are asked will raise another question in your mind, so feel free to step to one of the mics. Okay, we'll start with this question first of all. Mr. Wesson, the question is, what changes would you make in your own program?
We haven't had the opportunity to amend the Act since we started until this coming legislative session, which we expect to start this fall. And we are putting forward amendments to it. One is that we say a direct descendant is from a father to a son, daughter, son-in-law, grandson, and so on. But you people as farmers know that if you had not a son that wanted to take over, you would much prefer to see your brother's son or your nephew move into the farming of your land. And we propose to introduce that into legislation that would include without competition brothers, sisters, nieces, and nephews. That's one change that I would make. Some people say, would you make it a more easy system of buying? We don't feel that our 5-year option to buy is going to cause anybody any handicaps. Basically, it'll do 2 things. One, it will give them time to decide whether they really want to invest in farming. Is farming for them? Before they really go whole hog and borrow that kind of money to buy. They've got 5 years to make up their mind. And I'm pretty sure by the caliber of young fellows that we're putting on the land that it's going to take them 5 years before they're in a position to even consider buying. So 5 years isn't going to hurt them. But I think what is necessary is that they have their own free choice. Some people say they shouldn't be a choice, they should be made to buy after a period of time. I can't really buy that. I say let them of their own free choice decide whether they want to buy or whether they want to lease. And I think as long as a lease is fair, then a lot of them will opt to continue leasing. What it will do, of course, by this method, that nobody else can buy that land except they themselves. They're not in competition after this 5-year period. They're not in competition with the corporates or the neighbors who are much bigger and more able to buy. And there's a few other things I suppose I could go into, and those are the main ones that I would suggest to you that I would like to see some difference in.
Thank you. The next question reads, is there a measure of economic improvement in the areas where the land bank is in use? And also they would like to know the average age of the lessee and the lessor.
Each year we take off statistics on what our people, our lessees look like, how old they are, and this type of thing. But to actually say, has this man made a success of it? We know some examples where, yes, they definitely have made a success. They've come from a position of a non-tax-paying person, possibly on welfare, into a tax-paying situation. We know that. We know we've helped a lot of people who couldn't sell elsewhere move into the selling market and let them retire. But to actually say, in this area, how much has it done? We haven't really in 3 years had a chance really to measure that aspect. Our young farmers, the average age in the first year of our leases was 34, the next year it was 33. You would think it would be younger than that, but 2/3 of the land we buy are not economic units in themselves. We're adding the land to other farmers that are already farming. So this brings up your age group. But the age group that receives the most leases are between the age of 20 and 25. So the age group will keep coming down.
Okay, there are a number of questions coming up here regarding interest rates and how they're set and what type of interest rates does the government pay on its monies, and also what interest rate does the farmer pay when he leases or rents or buys the land.
And that question leads into another thing that I would like to see changed in land bank, and I think we're going to see it changed. Over the 4 borrowing years that we've borrowed at, our average rate of borrowing that the government has had to pay for money has worked out at 7.8%. In the first year of our leasing, that would be the people at least in 73, their leases was 5% of the value that we paid for it. The next year, because of the increase in net returns to farming, the new leases were set in at 5 3/4. Last year, it was set at 6.5. So we're in a lost position no matter which way you look at it. They set those interest rates for 10 years that they can't be changed. But after 3 years, we can change the value of the land. Now, you can see what's going to happen. In 1972, if we paid $50 for an acre of land, land in Saskatchewan has more than doubled in the last 3 years. So if we adjust that man's rent based on its new value, say $100 an acre, $125, he's still paying 5% on, but really what he's doing is paying about 12.5% based on our investment. In other words, the money could roll into the government or the commission. We could make a pot full. And this isn't what the program is designed to do. It's designed to get people established in farming. So yes, we are looking at a new method of setting our rental rates. We hope to do it so that based on each unit's ability to produce, let them all pay the fair share of what our costs of money are. Now, in the long run, what we really like to see is a pooling system, so that it wouldn't matter when we bought that land that this man had, or what we paid for it, wouldn't matter. If his productivity was as good as the man 20 miles away, they should be paying the same rent. Or, in other words, we'd be like a tax situation back home. If the municipality or your county needs so many dollars to operate, they say, okay, your assessed value of your land is worth so much, we need so many dollars, you divide what your assessment dollars into the amount of dollars you need and come up with a mill rate. And everybody pays based on that mill rate. This is what we anticipate it would be the ideal thing to do. And I think this is the way we're heading, so that people are not caught by paying us very high rent in years of high land prices, and some people being very lucky and paying us less rent in years when we're paying very little for it. So we'd like to see them all the same, based on each individual parcel's ability to produce, on a break-even system for the whole program.
The next question reads, at 65 years of age, or whatever your retirement age is in Saskatchewan, does the older farmer have to take all of the money and pay income tax on it that he receives, the money from the government?
I'm not sure exactly which end of the game you're talking about when he retires. When we buy it, he has most likely made a capital gain, the farmer that is retiring when we move in to buy. And now in Canada, we do have capital gains. You people have had capital gains for so long, you're used to it. But in Canada, we haven't. But now, based on its value in 1972 and the value that we pay for it, this man will have to pay capital gains. Now, if he continued to lease, and if this is the 65-year-old man the question was about, really he would have nothing to sell back to us. If he was going to say, I now want the lease to go to my son, he wouldn't be in a capital gain position, and this would be helpful from a tax standpoint. Now, you can say, and people have said, okay, it's fine for the first generation. Dad's got his farm to sell. That's what he's going to retire on. But if the young buck is smart, once he gets established in 4 and 5, 6 years, if he's smart, instead of paying a forced savings which a mortgage does to you. Instead of putting a forced savings into buying land, he put it into a retirement program. He's going to be better off because returns to money has been better than the returns to land, to the land investment.
Mr. Wesson, what type of leasing do you use? Is it a cash rent or a sharecrop basis?
Yes, it's a cash rental. This is the way we structure it based on we use a percentage of the land value. It is a cash rental. We don't like crop share. Crop share is not fair. It's hard to police, it's hard to administer, and not only that, if you're on a crop share and I say I need 1/3 of those bushels for my share, you're forced to raise bushels. Under a cash rent, doesn't matter if you've got it into something you're going to feed your livestock. If you put it into fodder, it doesn't matter. We don't care. You're paying a cash rental. And if your management is much better, all of those advantage and gains in production based on this fellow's management, we don't get 1/3 of it, and I think that is important. Therefore, we expect that people will farm that land just as good or better than if they owned it themselves, because every dollar that they can make extra is theirs.
Do you make loans for livestock and machinery, such as different operating loans? And let's see, also what type of management counseling is available with the land bank program?
We're not allowed to make loans for chattels. We have what we call a Farm Start program in Saskatchewan, which lends money to farmers to expand livestock, either to buy livestock or to buy livestock facilities. That is separate and apart from Land Bank. It's just another program that the government has instituted to make sure that anybody that wants to get into livestock can get into it. Now, if that man needs a home, if we bought this farm, it's a unit, we want the fellow to live there, yet the house is not suitable, we will lend him the money to put up that house at the same rate that the money cost us. If we're paying 7 3/4 for money, that's what he's paying, and he pays us back at that rate. We can't lend for machinery and this type of thing. That's a chattel. There are other programs where they can buy machinery through farm improvement loan programs that are already in place. There was one other point. No, slipped me. It's gone by.
What is the maximum acreage that you will lease to one man? And also, they pose this hypothetical situation. A man starts leasing with less than $60,000, which is your maximum amount. But after leasing a number of years, his net worth is $100,000. Can he continue to lease?
Yes, he can carry on with his leasing program. Fact is, if he's gone from 60 to 100, I would say that it was a darn good example that the program is working. This is what it's all about, is that he can gain. But if he went past that and he decided he would like some more land, we wouldn't help him get any more. Now, the question has often come up, how big are we going to let him go after he's got our start with Land Bank? Should we be able to put dampers on him? Some people said, yes, we should. And I say, if you're going to do that, do it to everybody. Let's not make second-rate lessees out of our land bank people. Let's not say that, mister, if you get this big as an individual, we want our land back, unless they're going to do it to everybody. So, whether it's right or wrong, right now we have no limits on how big they get. And in 3 years we have one shining example that embarrasses us very much, that they have got too big. And we would like to take it back, but then we're going to start treating our people different. And as far as I'm concerned, our lessees should be in the same position as if they owned it. And if we don't treat them like that, then the program isn't going to work. Oh, yes. what do we consider, what is a family farm? I suppose you can throw that one around here all afternoon and never come up with a definition of a family farm. But mainly it's something that'll give you a unit of production that'll give the family a decent standard of living, that they can have the amenities of life that most of us would like to have. We do say, and we work on a land work unit, land work units, which is not maybe unfamiliar to a number of people in the States, because I know your FHA program here in the States uses land work units. And we say that 300 land work units is about as high as we're going to go in setting a man up. If he's bigger than that, then he's going to have to look somewhere else. We won't help him. Now, there is a minimum on the other side. How small should he be before we let him in? And this can be a bad one, because if we set a man up too small and he fails, then there's criticism to the program. So we're going to make a few people mad by not leasing to them when they're too small. But I think in the long run, they would thank us if we did let them go and they failed, and we couldn't add in the future more land to it to make it economic.
Does the renter need approval before putting improvements on his land?
We suggest to our lessees that they check with our counselors to see if we would agree that it's a proper improvement. And it's for his own protection. He can do whatever he darn well pleases. But if we say that isn't a proper improvement and then he had to give up the lease for some reason, then he's got a white elephant sitting there that we might pay him very little for. But if we say, yes, that's a proper improvement, if you leave, we'll buy it back at its then market value. And if it's something that appreciates in value, such as steel bins over the last few years, we'd be paying him more money than he actually paid for it, which is fair ball. But they can put any improvements on they want. We lease the land to 65 for a cash rental. But we also take the improvements that are on it and sell it to him under an agreement for sale. I think I mentioned this in my talk, because if we didn't, we would be in a position where we'd have to have an army of carpenters and plumbers and electricians looking after the improvements. So if he retires or leaves that lease, we guarantee that we will buy his lease equity in those. And this includes any improvement that he's put on with our okay. We like to be easy with him, and we do. If it means clearing and breaking more land, then we pay for it, not him, because it accrues to the value of the land, and he shouldn't have to pay for that.
What adaptations, Mr. Wesson, would we have to make in a state such as South Dakota to implement a land bank program? Some possibilities of maybe some alterations to your program that would make it work in South Dakota?
Well, I suppose the hardest thing any area would have in selling a program like this is the fact that who's owning the darn land. We as farmers, and I used to be one, always think that we've got to own our own land. And I think this is the thing that you have to be watching at all times to sell it. And as I mentioned before, it doesn't matter to me whether that man buys in 5 years or whether he leases, but the option must be his. I know I've been into the state of South Dakota, this is my third time I guess, and I've been into Montana, I've been in Minnesota, talking, and been in North Dakota, talking land bank. And the feedback that I get is it acceptable here now, the idea of government owning land? Well, to me, the question is very simple. It's either the question of the government owning the land on a temporary basis if you want, until the man is in position to buy, or let the corporates have it. One of the two. Now, this, I think, is the thing you'd have to watch. And I wouldn't care if somebody said in 10 years, mister, you gotta buy it. That wouldn't bother me at all. But when he did buy, he's the only one that can buy it. We've distributed the land in a manner that meets this criteria of family farm economic unit thing. Other than that, if you can find the money, I think the program would work anywhere. you need some modifications because of the thinking of people, the beliefs of people. And basically it's state ownership, and how far do you want to go with it, but how far you can go without it is the question that you have to answer. And you must answer that one yourselves. I can't.
Mr. Wesson, did Saskatchewan have a problem with inheritance taxes and estate taxes? Were they a problem? Was that part of the reasoning behind implementing a land bank program?
No, I don't think so. The federal government looked after or was in charge of estate taxes and this type of thing, but they opted out of it, decided there was more money in capital gains, so the federal government took that one over, and the provinces want to look after the inheritance taxes. I don't think this was a problem, because while the province of Saskatchewan has taken it over, their limits before they start to tax them is well beyond the family farm size value. So it's not going to hurt them. The problem was that the young fellows that wanted to get started, whether it was from Dad's land or from outside land, they just couldn't raise the money. And if Dad had to sell, he was selling to somebody else. And I think this is the main problem. When we started in 72, there was a lot of interest from old people because there was no market for land in 1972 in Saskatchewan. Most people that were behind the program were vendors. Now the most interest is, and more so today than in 72, the young fellows that want to farm. Because if they had a problem trying to find mortgage money in 72 for land at say $50 an acre, they're sure going to have a lot more trouble trying to find it at $125. Our land isn't quite as bad as yours possibly. We run all the way now from about $75 for poor agricultural land up to $400, $450 an acre for our best. But I think it's what brought it in was the fact that there was just no way to go under the old mortgage system to let these young fellows keep going.
Here's a question. It says, what is the time span from dream to reality?
Well, they tell me, and of course I'm not political, they tell me back in caucus in the NDP party in Saskatchewan that a good number of years ago they were discussing land bank. But they were out of office from 1964 till 1971, and they came back in again. And part of the platform was land bank. And they went in on land bank. And they won the next election on land bank. But when they got in 71, that was in summer of 71, they said, okay, we're going to implement it. They started working on the act. The Minister of Agriculture went around Saskatchewan to 12 different meetings, some of the biggest meetings that were ever held in Saskatchewan. People came out to listen and understand about land bank. They hired me in March 72. I set up the program, the appraisal methods, all of the forms and things that were necessary to get the thing started. They proclaimed the act in July 72. We were buying land by the end of September. So once you get your legislation in place, and if somebody has been working on it to get the methods straightened out, dream to reality isn't very long. In other words, if you got your legislation this year, you could be land banking in 1976.
If the lessee buys the land, then how long does he have to own the land before he can sell?
There's no restriction. Our Act says, and the regulations to the Act say, that when the man opts to buy, he's got a certain length of time to find the money to buy it from us for cash. We're not a mortgage institution. We do have mortgage corporations on the federal level to lend money to farmers for buying. So we say when he's ready to buy, he must go elsewhere. Now, as soon as he has title in his name, might be mortgaged, and no doubt will be heavily mortgaged, he has the right to sell it. And if there's capital gain in it, it's his. But once he opts to buy and gets his mortgage agreement ready, the title is transferred to his name, he can turn around the next day and sell it.
Does your wheat pool in Canada have the power to boost prices of wheat to the point where it covers all production costs, interest on investment, taxes, depreciation, management, and family and hired labor? If not, does the government make up the difference?
Yeah, that covers a big one. Our Saskatchewan wheat pool was first organized back in the way 1923, and I was very close to it myself because my father was very involved. They started themselves as a pool. In other words, people sold at initial payment. When all of the cropping was in and everybody had sold to them with initial payment, whatever the average was for that grade of wheat, everybody got the same amount of money. But in the crash of 29, they got caught paying too much initial payment, and they went broke, except for the fact that the provincial government bailed them out so they could keep going. But they decided that they weren't big enough to run a pool like they had envisaged. So in about 1942-43, the federal government enacted what they call the Canadian Wheat Board, which is pretty well, it's all farmer controlled pretty well, but they run a pooling system. They're basing their initial payment something close to what they expect the final price will be for that grade of wheat on the average. Everybody gets it when they sell. At the end of the crop year, whatever's left in the pool, they divide it based on deliveries, just like your local co-op does. Now, what they sell, of course, is based on world market prices, and if there's not enough to cover, if you're going broke as farmers, no, there's nothing the federal or the provincial government are doing to salvage that one. Although they are starting to work in Canada, it's not through yet, but a guaranteed income plan that you can't go below a certain figure if in case of bad times and this type of a thing. But it's not in yet. But they are looking at a kind of a guaranteed approach to income so that you can take this kind of thing out of farmers' paychecks. But as the wheat pool, no, they're not in a pooling system anymore. They're a farmers' own grain handling policy organization.
One final question. There were some of the questions here asking how these people could get information concerning the land bank. Is there an address where they can write in Saskatchewan to receive information?
I don't know whether they brought enough brochures to go around. I brought a half a dozen so of our last annual report, and I'll leave it to the discretion of the management of Farmers Union to decide who could better utilize them. I think I might just about have enough of our brochures to go around on one per family basis, and I'll leave them up here for distribution. Our office in Regina is C4, Classroom Building, University of Regina, Regina, Saskatchewan. C4, well, it's the Saskatchewan Land Bank Commission. C4, Classroom Building, University of Regina, Regina, Saskatchewan. If you mail any time now, if our mail people go on strike like they said they were going to, and I haven't caught Canadian news to see whether they have,